I'm Brian Stewart. When Americans hold elections, the world pays attention with good reason. For a U.S. president has the power and influence to shape the global agenda. As Americans prepare for the November election, many will no doubt have this question foremost in mind. Will the world be a safer place with a Republican in the White House? This was the topic of the inaugural Munk Debate held in Toronto at the Royal Ontario Museum. Canadian business leader Peter Munk and his wife Melanie have launched these debates as a way to spark lively public discussion of the most pressing issues of our time. 4 leading thinkers were brought together to hash out the pros and cons of the question at stake. And because it was a public debate, the audience had a special role to play. They voted on the question before the event began and were asked to vote again at the end. Would the speakers have the ability, through public debate, to make them change their minds? Here now are the Munk Debates, moderated by the BBC's Lise Doucette.
Hello and welcome. Welcome to fellow Canadians, fellow debaters. Welcome to our guests from south of the border and from across the pond. And how are we going to start? We're going to start on an issue that all of us, no matter where we come from, have to be worried about. The world being a safer place. Would the world be a safer place if a Republican was in the White House? Join me, please, in welcoming our speakers. First of all, against the motion, Ambassador Richard Holbrooke. Between 94 and 96, he was the Assistant Secretary of State for European and Canadian Affairs. But he decided, those Canadians, they could handle the Quebec referendum on their own. So in 1995, he turned his attention to the Balkans and he became the chief architect of the Dayton Peace Accords. He served everywhere from Vietnam to the United Nations, where he was part of Bill Clinton's administration. And now at last, he's been advising Bill Clinton's wife, Hillary. Also against the motion is Samantha Power. Samantha Power is a leading human rights scholar. She's a Pulitzer Prize-winning author. She's a Harvard scholar. Now, unlike Richard, she doesn't give very much advice to Hillary Clinton. In fact, she thinks she's a bit of a monster. Now, she does regret saying that, and those bloody journalists, it should have been off the record. But so she resigned from Barack Obama's campaign team, but it doesn't mean she won't be back there again. For the motion, from across the pond, Neil Ferguson. Thank you. British historian, Harvard scholar, leading columnist. Time magazine calls him one of the top 100 thinkers of our time. He's also a leading supporter, and in fact, an advisor, a special advisor on foreign policy to John McCain, the presumed nominee for the Republican candidate for the White House. And last but not least, we have Charles Krauthammer, who's joining us. He has become one of the most influential writers. He's also a Pulitzer Prize-winning syndicated columnist for The Washington Post. And for the last 2 decades, he's been influencing policymakers in the United States. But can he influence you? So please, first, for the motion, Neil Ferguson.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Lisa. Thank you very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen. As an historian, I must say I find it very implausible that over the last, let's say, 100 years, Democrats have consistently made the world safer than Republicans. A moment's reflection on the history of the United States will set the record straight. All the major wars fought by the United States in the 20th century were fought by Democratic and not Republican presidents. Ladies and gentlemen, I wouldn't be standing here talking to you now if any of the other potential candidates for the Republican nomination had been successful. Providentially, and I'm not sure they quite meant to, Republicans nominated the one man who is ideally suited to lead the United States out of the the legitimacy crisis, the diplomatic crisis, and the military crisis in which it finds itself. The thing that most impresses me, ladies and gentlemen, about John McCain is that he understands the predicament that the United States finds itself in. He sees that there is no way that the United States can walk away from Iraq with the job unfinished, half-finished, completely aborted. The stakes are too high. This is not 1968. This is not Indochina. We are talking about the most strategically vital region of the world, and the United States cannot afford to allow that region to descend into a maelstrom of sectarian violence and geopolitical conflict. The critical thing is that whereas a year or two ago, many people feared that the ultimate outcome of the American invasion of Iraq would be catastrophe, the surge has proved those Cassandras wrong. John McCain took an enormous risk when he backed General Petraeus' strategy. It very nearly cost him the nomination, but John McCain is not a man who's afraid to take that kind of political risks. We need a straight-talking president in the United States. We do not need the heir to Jimmy Carter, which is what I fear we could get. We do need the heir to Ronald Reagan. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Neil Ferguson. Samantha Power, against the motion.
Here is what the world can expect from a Republican president. And let me say, and let me echo what Neil has said about John McCain. John McCain is the most honorable, the most experienced, and the most knowledgeable of the Republicans in the Republican field. But a Republican president would continue a war in Iraq that has left the U.S. military at its breaking point, which undermines U.S. military readiness, which in turn undermines the U.S. ability to concentrate resources in Afghanistan, a place that Canadians have a deep interest and a vested interest in stabilizing. Also, that undermining of military readiness interferes with the U.S. ability to engage in strategic lift of peacekeepers from the developing world to places like Darfur. A Republican president will continue a war in Iraq and policies associated with that war that undermines the U.S. ability to lead within international institutions on a range of other issues, from the hard security issues like proliferation or the containment of Iran and Ahmadinejad, to Darfur, to Burma, and even when the United States does come around, as I think Senator McCain also is prepared to do in some measure on the issue of climate change, it will undermine our summoning power in the United Nations and in global bodies and regional institutions. It matters when you have 5% approval ratings in a country. Governments fear they will fall if they affiliate with the United States on crucial issues. And in the context of Iran, I'll just say this, because I know Charles is going to engage it, and I know I'm about to be decapitated. It is, I think, reckless at this stage not to engage in every, not to embark upon every policy that we can in service of stability and in service of the mitigation of suffering. That does not mean you meet with an abusive regime, a Holocaust denier tomorrow, but it means that to rule out aggressive diplomatic engagement is reckless, and precisely the kind of recklessness we've seen over the last 7.5 years. Thank you.
Samantha Power.